morning, everyone. Hope your day has started off good. Gonna continue on this morning. We're gonna pivot here, though. We're gonna move off of Jacob and God's relationship with him. We're gonna start talking about his son Joseph. Now, when we pick up here, a few things have happened. Rachel, Joseph's mother, has had another child, and in childbirth she dies. So Jacob buries the love of his life, and also Isaac has died. Jacob and Esau have buried their father. So this is years down the road. Pick up and we read that Joseph, for lack of better terms, was Jacob's favorite child. And from what we can read, it was by far and away. It says that Jacob had given Joseph a coat of many colors. Now, let's not think about the Dolly Parton movie, if you've seen that. That's not what this was. A kind of we're led to believe, a scarlet type robe. And what that signified was that you were the heir, the first heir. So what that means is that Jacob had basically, even though he hadn't told him, everyone knew that Joseph was going to get the inheritance of the firstborn, even though he was not the firstborn. You know, a bit of a dad moment there as I read this about Jacob was obviously his failure as a father, which was, he's telling the other kids, Joseph is the firstborn of the one I actually wanted, from the wife I actually wanted from. So he is conveying his love for Rachel into their child together. Now, this was naturally going to lead to animosity between the brothers and the little brother. Benjamin would have been the youngest, but Joseph was the one that they all hated because their dad loved him more than he loved the rest of them, and was openly forthcoming about that. He didn't try to hide it, obviously. So as they're going through, and one day Joseph tells the rest of his brothers, look, I had this dream. And the dreams probably weren't the best thing for Joseph to share with his brothers that already hated him, which were basically, the interpretation of them is that you were all going to bow down to me. Now, in the context of this dream, let's remember it wasn't inaccurate. As we'll go through, and I'm sure you already know, this will come to pass. But maybe the timing of sharing it and the arrogance of it wasn't the best. Joseph was a teenage boy, and when I was a teenager, I didn't, make the best decisions. This was probably not the best decision. Says he even told it to his dad, and his dad scolded him a bit, but then he thought about it. Probably thought, well, I've put you at that position, I can see why you would think that. None of them realized that this was a dream that God had given Joseph purposely. Now, Joseph wasn't mature enough yet his brothers are out tending the flock, Jacob says to Joseph, go out and check on your brothers and make sure they hadn't got into any trouble. Now that naturally implies to me that obviously the brothers were pretty good at getting into trouble. We already know how good Levi and Simeon were. You know, they went and killed a whole village. So they weren't normal troublemakers. Oh, and the other part we've skipped, that Reuben, his oldest son, had slept with one of Jacob's concubines, and Jacob found out about that. There are consequences. You know, let's remember this. Remember these things that happen, because there will be consequences to these sins that will last for generations, just like we read about with Abraham and Ishmael. Remember Ishmael, that name's fixing to come back up. So Joseph goes to check on his brothers. He asks the guy, hey, you seen my brothers? I think they went on further back. And as he's approaching his brothers, they see him coming. And they say to each other, hey, here comes the dreamer. Let's kill him. You know, the hatred had grown so deep that they're willing to kill their brother. You know, that's how dangerous hatred is. I'm sure it didn't start out that way. When they were kids, when he was little, they probably didn't hate him. A little bit of resentment, jealousy. And that resentment and jealousy morphed into hatred. And that's why these things are so important that we get rid of them immediately. Now, if you got a little resentment in your life that's eating at you, you better get rid of it. You better get rid of it. And you'd say to yourself, you know, just like I would, well, I'll never let it get to the point that I would want to kill someone. Be careful with that kind of thought. Sin can be all-encompassing. Then you say, well, how can you say that? I know a lot of good Christian people that have done things that I never thought they would have done, nor would they have thought they would have done. But they let that sin get into their life, and they isolated themselves, and eventually it took over. It had a stronghold. Don't think our enemy doesn't use that. And he constantly in your ear. You know, he was constantly in Jacob's son's ears. He don't love you. He doesn't even want you. He doesn't even recognize that you're his son. And when you have that, here's the thing that he has to have. If he's going to attack you like that, he has to have someone that you can focus on. He has to make something real and tangible. It's usually another person. You know, we think about covetousness, for instance. There actually has to be something to covet. Hatred has to have a target. Boy, they had, and our enemy had an easy one on this one. It was Joseph. You know, if he wasn't around, maybe your daddy would love you a little bit more. He's the problem. You know, getting serious daddy issues here. We want to act like daddy issues are something new. They're not new. These boys had some serious daddy issues. So Joseph approaches his brothers, and before he gets there, Reuben, the oldest brother, says, no, we shouldn't kill him. You know, this is our brother. And we don't want his blood on our hands. We don't want to live with that, guys. We don't want to be judged for that. So they strip him of his clothing and throw him in a pit, which I would assume is a well. Something he can't get out of. And there's Joseph, alone in a well. Now, why Reuben took up for Joseph is not very clear here. You know, we can't assume that maybe he thought, hey, if I save my brother, maybe Dad will love me more. Don't know. It's all speculation. So, obviously, something happens to Reuben and he leaves. And while he's gone, the brothers are sitting there, and then comes a band of Ishmaelites. I told you Ishmael would be back. A band of Ishmaelites comes and takes, and the brothers say, hey, let's just sell him. What good's it going to do to kill him? Let's just sell him. We'll sell him into slavery. We can make some money that way. And we don't have to kill our brother. So they sell him. Reuben comes back, sees what has happened. Obviously, by coming back, checking the well, we're to assume Reuben was going to come back and save his brother. And when he sees who he's gone, they tell him what they've done. He tears his clothing. Joseph, their brother, has been sold into slavery. You know, what's the thing that these few chapters reveal about God? To me, it tells me, you know, as we'll see, God will use sinful people to carry out his plan. God's plan was always for Joseph to save his people. Now, the fact that his brothers were so evil and God had to use that, God didn't want that, but that had to happen that way. So, you know, everything that happens to us is not always because we've sinned, but the sins of others will affect us. But here's the good part. As we read through and we study this, God's going to use it for something good. God's going to use it for good. God bless you. I hope you have a great day.